All right, welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to tackle a term you've probably heard a million times, the autism spectrum. But what is it really? Is it just one thing? And what's with this huge spike in diagnoses we keep hearing about? Let's dive in and figure this out.
Okay, let's just kick things off with a number. And this one, it kind of stops you in your tracks. Right now, it's estimated that nearly 1 out of every 100 kids is diagnosed as being somewhere on the autism spectrum. I mean, wow, that's a pretty staggering figure. And it naturally makes you wonder, are we looking at some kind of new epidemic here? And, what does the spectrum even mean anyway? To get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with that very idea, the spectrum.
Right, so this is probably the single most important thing to get your head around. Autism, it's not one single thing at all. It's not a neat little box you can put someone in. Think of it more like, I don't know, a huge, varied landscape. And to really get a feel for that, I want you to meet three very, very different people who all share that same diagnosis. So first, there's David. Now, his story is probably what a lot of people picture when they hear the word autism. We're talking what's often called classic autism. He got his diagnosis super early, seemed to be kind of lost in his own world, and thrives on these really rigid routines. He can tell you what he needs, for sure, but that back and forth of a conversation, that's a real struggle. Okay, then you've got someone like Gary. In his case, it's a whole lot more complex. He wasn't even diagnosed until he was 12, with something that at the time was called pervasive developmental disorder. It was kind of this catch-all category for kids who didn't quite fit the other labels. But here's the thing that's so interesting about Gary. He really wants to have friends. He's interested in people. But he just can't seem to crack the code on all those little social cues, Like, is someone just teasing him in a friendly way, or are they actually being mean? That confusion makes it almost impossible to build relationships.
And last up, let's look at Edward. He's a great example of what used to be known as Asperger's syndrome. This kid is, incredibly smart. He had this huge vocabulary from a super young age, and when he gets into a topic, whether it's birds, eggs, or math, he goes all in. But put him in a social situation, it's just baffling to him. All those unwritten rules feel completely foreign, and honestly, he just finds the whole thing a total bore.
So look at that. You've got David, Gary, and Edward. Three totally different people with totally different challenges and strengths, but all under that one umbrella of the spectrum. Which of course brings us right back to our big question. If people like this have always existed, why the heck are we seeing this massive explosion in diagnoses now? Is it a real epidemic or is something else going on? Okay, check out this chart. This comes from a really important study done in California, and it shows something pretty amazing. See that line for autism diagnoses going up and up? Now look at the other line. That's for diagnoses of what was then called mental retardation, which is, an outdated term for intellectual disability. And that line is going down. They're almost perfect mirror images of each other. So, what does that tell us? Are these two totally separate things happening at once? Well, probably not. The data here is screaming that they're connected. It really looks like a huge part of this supposed autism epidemic wasn't a bunch of new cases popping up out of nowhere. It was a change in what we called them. And this, right here, is the key. What looked like an epidemic of the condition was really an epidemic of awareness. As we all, doctors, parents, teachers, got smarter about what autism actually looks like in all its forms, and as the official criteria for diagnosis got wider, kids who would have been misdiagnosed in the past, or maybe not diagnosed at all, finally started getting the right label. And, looking at the data, this is exactly how the scientific community has tackled other big questions around this. I'm sure you've heard about the concern over the MMR vaccine and a possible link to autism. For years, that was a huge public fear. But the science on this is just overwhelming. Study after study all over the world involving millions of kids have all come to the same conclusion. There's just no link, period. So if we're not dealing with an epidemic, then what are we dealing with? Well, to really get it, we have to stop looking just at behaviors and start looking at the hardware. We have to look at the brain. And that's what it means when you hear the term neurodevelopmental disorder. It's not about what happens to you. It's about how your brain was wired from day one. Yeah, that term is super important. Neurodevelopmental. It means the condition starts with our genes way before birth. It's not something a kid catches or develops later on. It's literally part of the brain's original wiring diagram.
And the proof for this genetic link? It's incredibly strong, especially when you look at twin studies. Think about this. If one identical twin who shares all the same DNA is on the spectrum, there is a 90% chance the other twin will be too. 90%. But for non-identical twins, who are just like regular siblings genetically, that number drops all the way down to 10%. That huge difference is a giant flashing sign pointing straight at genetics. And it's not just genetics. There's some really cool research showing actual physical differences in how the brain grows. In early childhood, an autistic brain can actually grow much faster than usual. One of the leading ideas for why this happens is a difference in something called synaptic pruning. Just imagine a gardener trimming back a rosebush, right? You cut away the extra, weak branches so the main ones can grow stronger. The brain does that too. It prunes away unneeded connections. But if that process doesn't happen as much, you might end up with a brain that's just overconnected. Okay, so the brain is wired differently. It's overconnected. We get that. But what does that actually feel like? How does that wiring difference show up in the real world? How does it create that one central puzzle that we see in David, Gary, and Edward, that social enigma?
Well, there's this fantastic little experiment that really helps explain it. It's called the Sally-Ann test, and it's so simple, it's brilliant. Here's how it works. You've got two dolls, Sally and Ann. Sally has a marble. She puts her marble in her little basket, and then she leaves the room. While Sally's gone, sneaky Ann comes along, takes the marble out of the basket, and puts it in her own box. Simple enough, right? Now Sally comes back into the room. She wants to play with her marble. So the big question is, where is Sally going to look for her marble? The answer to that one little question tells you almost everything you need to know about how different minds understand the world. Okay, so a neurotypical kid will almost always say she'll look in the basket. And if you ask why, they'll say, well, because that's where she left it. They can naturally put themselves in Sally's head and realize that Sally doesn't know what they know. That's called theory of mind. But very often, a child with classic autism will say she'll look in the box. Why? Because that's where the marble actually is. They're operating on the facts they have, not on what's going on in someone else's mistaken mind. This is sometimes called mind blindness. And that idea, that simple difference, it changes everything. Once you really get that, you can start to see why this isn't just a big list of things someone can't do. It's not a deficit. It is a fundamentally different way of processing reality. Temple Grandin, the amazing scientist and author who is herself autistic, she puts it perfectly. She says her mind works just like an internet search engine that has been set to access only images. It's such a brilliant way to put it. Her mind isn't a broken version of a typical mind. It's just running a totally different and, in her case, very powerful operating system. And that really is the whole point, isn't it? This isn't about fixing somebody or trying to make them normal. It's about understanding and making space for a different, and in many ways, pretty remarkable way of seeing the world. It's all about shifting from seeing deficits to seeing differences.
Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to chew on, right? In a world that's so obsessed with social skills and reading between the lines, what can a neurotypical brain actually learn from a mind that's built differently? A mind that focuses on logic, sees patterns that the rest of us completely miss, and just experiences reality from a whole other angle? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.